some crimes, it's often hard to know who's telling the truth. In this twisted case from the UK, a photography student from Cambridge went missing under some very worrying circumstances. But when the police dug a little deeper, the truth that emerged was truly horrible and totally disturbing. Sadly, the police do think the worst. But even after a trial, what really happened to her is still a tragic mystery. Let's dive in. Bernadette Walker, known as B, loved photography and expressing herself through her fashion choices. She loved to dye her hair in rainbow colors and seemed to be super creative, but her family and friends say she was always kind of shy. Her friends, who she mostly made online, also described her as socially awkward. Well, she had a lot going on at home, where life was pretty complicated. Her mom, Sarah Walker, had 9 children, including her, and lived with a man named Scott Walker. Even though he wasn't related by blood, B called him Dad. While Sarah and Scott were together, Sarah even changed her surname to Walker, even though they weren't married. However, by July 2018, that relationship was basically over, and B's mom was dating another guy. Despite that, Scott Walker continued to live in the house with all of them. That sounds kinda awkward. This included B's mom, 2 little brothers, and her little sisters, one of whom is disabled. That's a full house. Then on July 18th, 2020, Scott Walker collected B in the car from his parents' house in Peterborough, where she had stayed overnight. Scott said they had an argument during the drive, and when he stopped to roll a cigarette, she jumped right out of the car and ran off in an alleyway. After this, B completely disappeared, and no one has ever heard from her since. But her mom reported her missing on July 21st, after she'd been gone for 3 whole days. That's a little suspicious, right? And they reported this at 3 a.m., a really strange time to report someone missing who's already been gone for that long. While they were still looking, B's mom gave this statement on social media. "We have had no contact with her since 1 a.m. on July 20th, when she texted me to say she would be home soon. None of her friends have heard from her, and she's not accessed social media." Now, B was someone who pretty much lived on social media, so this was super unusual for her. There was a big search in the area of Cowbit, Lincolnshire, which is a really rural part of the UK. Despite that, there was still no sign of where she'd gone. Her mom asked the public to help her in distributing posters, and everyone obviously hoped that B would be found and get home safe. But not everything was how it seemed. In September 2020, 7 weeks after she was declared missing, the Cambridgeshire police made Bernadette's case a no-body investigation. These are super rare because a lot of the evidence can't be proven easily, but they do happen. This meant that even though there was no trace of B, not even her remains, the police were really sure that something awful had happened to her. Due to the length of time Bernadette has been missing and concerns she may have come to some harm, we made the decision to declare this a murder investigation yesterday morning. And they seem to have a pretty good idea of who is to blame. They searched the family home, and the suspicion quickly fell on Scott Walker. He had been the last person to see B, and it turned out he had a pretty strong motive for wanting her gone. Then, in an even more horrible twist, they arrested B's mom as well, because the horrifying reason why B was with her grandparents right before she vanished, apparently she'd told her mom that Scott had been violating her for several years. Later at the trial, they revealed that her mom told B that she didn't believe her, so it was decided she should spend the night with her grandparents while things calmed down. Mom of the year, right? Her grandparents have said that B cried when they asked her to talk about what was happening. Gotta say, that makes the thought of him picking her up the next day really creepy, and even more worrying, right? It doesn't make sense that he was the one to come and get her if he had been doing this to her. So it's hardly a shock that during what was probably a very upsetting drive home, she ran away. But when questioned, Scott hasn't been able to pinpoint exactly where she ran off. When asked why he had told the police he was at Salter's Way, not Skater's Way, he said, "Remembering stuff is difficult. I'm unconvinced." The police seemed sure that Scott and Sarah were trying to lay a false trial, which would explain why they didn't report her missing for 3 whole days. And the police can track where a phone is, right? Don't these guys watch any movies? Now, here is where their suspicious actions go off the charts. On the day B disappeared, Scott's phone was switched off for 91 minutes, which included the time he claims she left the car. He then rang B's mom and talked to her for about 20 minutes. Within 30 minutes of Scott calling Sarah, B's mom had sent a message to one of B's friends pretending to be her daughter. It said, "I ran away. I don't want to be in trouble for lying." Oh, and Scott and Sarah Walker also made a lot of trips to a lock-up garage between July 18th and July 20th, when more messages were sent from B's handset to her mom's phone. The police traced each phone's location, and B's was at that lockup, so she almost definitely didn't send those texts. Police charged them both with sending messages from B's phone between July 18th and September 12th, 2020. Remember, B had no phone, no ID, and no way to get any money since she ran off. Scott and Sarah also hacked into B's social media accounts and changed some passwords. But B's attempts at sneakiness didn't seem to convince many of the people who knew B well. A close friend of B's testified that he was suspicious about messages he'd received from her after she went missing on July 18th. He said they contained words B didn't ever use. The friend also said they'd seen a post on social media about what Scott Walker was allegedly doing to B just before it was deleted. And on July 20th, he began to receive messages from B's mother asking if she had heard from her. Scott and Sarah also gave the police false info relating to her disappearance. And then, to try and save her own skin, B's mom turned on Scott and started working against him with the police. She claimed that Scott was threatening her and made her send the fake messages. "I don't know what happened to the car, I just know what happened afterwards. I just know he forced me to send some messages. And it gets worse." She also told the police, "This was a man who threatened me. He has threatened to kill my partner and slit the dog's throat." So it sounds like B's mom knew a lot, but not all, about what had really happened to her daughter. However, before reporting her missing, Sarah did multiple Google searches for how to track a mobile phone, how to track a mobile phone's location, and "I think my partner knows where my missing child is," which kind of suggests she was preparing to cover something up, doesn't it? Sarah Walker also sent a message from her own phone asking friends of B to block her daughter on social media because she had lied about the abuse claims. Was she being threatened to do this? Was she trying to cover for Scott? Well, Scott was pretty horrible to live with. Another piece of evidence against him says that he apparently filmed B in the bathroom. He says because he was hiding candy wrappers and toilet paper rolls. Sarah also told officers that B had sent her a shocking text message describing even worse things that Scott had done to her. I think we can agree that that's totally disgusting, and it makes me so mad for B. She was being hurt by one parent and being called a liar by the other. She must have been so confused and scared. Scott Walker still insists that the family made up these stories because they just want him out of their crowded house, which also makes some sense, especially with the gross camera situation that he didn't deny. Even so, this is a super extreme way to go about it, isn't it? Even if people have faked this kind of disappearance case before, like with Shannon Matthews, which we covered in a previous video. Sarah's defense lawyer describes Scott as being controlling and narcissistic and a liar who spied on her and her new boyfriend. The court also told about pictures of bruises on Sarah's face caused by Scott. Scott says they were caused by B's mom hitting herself with a piece of wood, but he could never come up with a reason why. At the time of recording this video, Scott still denies all the charges and also denies 2 counts of perverting the course of justice, so she pled guilty to the 2 counts of it. FYI, she didn't even speak in court during the trial to avoid a sideshow. Frankly, neither of them come out of this whole situation very well. Even if neither are guilty, it does not look great, and the prosecution described them well in a statement. They lied to everyone around them about her disappearance, and they were unflinching in their pursuit of their devious, wicked plan. There's a heap of evidence that they deleted important messages on their own phones. And if you add in all the weird deceit between when B vanished and when they declared her missing, but nothing about this is simple. And even if Sarah didn't directly do anything, she's being charged with helping along. But Sarah's defense insists that there is no reason in logic and no reason in evidence for Sarah to believe Bernadette was dead and had been killed by Scott Walker. And on July 26, 2021, they found both Sarah and Scott Walker guilty of their charges. Full sentencing will happen on September 10th, 2021. One reporter said it was partly down to B's loyal friends giving their evidence so effectively. I want to give special praise to Bernadette's friends who gave evidence. They should be very proud of themselves. Incredibly mature for such young people. The sort of friends everyone should have. And to wrap up, let's hope they find out the truth about what Scott did to B. But because her mom and Scott diverted the investigation for so long, it's believed that any hope of finding B's body disappeared with her. Well, I really hope they're wrong about that. Doesn't this family photo look wholesome? Wouldn't you just love to be a part of a big happy family like this one? Those trips to Disneyland and big get-togethers look really fun, don't they? Even if you have to wear the same outfits. Yeah, okay, that's already creepy. But you might want to think twice and look again, because like so many cases on this channel, all these happy photos and videos were hiding something a lot more terrible. It would be left up to one brave girl to rescue her brothers and sisters before the truth ended all of their lives. Are you ready? It was a quiet evening in a peaceful Californian suburb where nobody ever expected anything bad to happen. It all looks pretty normal, right? But in January 2018, the police received this worrying phone call from the area.
I live in a family of 15 people, and my parents are abusing, they abuse us, and my 2 little sisters right now are chained up.
The Turpin family lived in that suburb, and the caller was one of their 13 children. The police investigated, and as they entered the house, they found out what Riverside County District Attorney Mike Hestron called
the worst, most aggravated child abuse cases I'd ever seen.
The girls' mom and dad were Louise and David Turpin. They'd married when Louise was in her early teens, and because of some very strong beliefs, they had 10 daughters and 3 sons. They'd moved to Paris, California in 2014, and one neighbor had spotted something really weird going on with the family. This was even before the police got involved. Mike Clifford said,
Anywhere from 12:30 to 3 in the morning is the kids marching between those 2 rooms up there.
And how long would they march back and forth for in single file?
Hours.
And in previous places where they'd lived in Fort Worth, Texas, the people who took over their houses found ropes on the bed and lots of filth and deceased animals. But nobody seemed to raise much concern. Even though nobody, even in the California suburbs, saw the children of this huge family outside very much, only when they did, they'd seen the children going through the trash, as if they were looking for food. But why on earth would they do this? Jordan Turpin knew that time was short. Her brothers and sisters were so weak after so many years of almost no food that she was sure they wouldn't all survive their move to Oklahoma. There was only one choice, and it was risky as hell. Now, Jordan had managed to get a hold of a deactivated cell phone and used it to watch her favorite singer, Justin Bieber. Unfortunately, her mom had caught her and punished her. She'd almost been suffocated just for watching some music. But Justin Bieber's songs had totally inspired Jordan to survive this nightmare. So, taking that deactivated cell phone, Jordan snuck out of the bedroom window. 2 of her younger teenage sisters escaped with her, but were soon so scared by being out there that they went back in the house. But Jordan kept going. She ran around the corner and made the call she hoped would save her family. She knew that if she got caught, she would be in a world of pain. What's even braver is she'd never even been outside before. Not on her own. Not at all. I have to wonder what they actually did during all those Disneyland trips. Now, in Jordan's urgent phone call because of the isolation, lack of food, and what she'd been put through, I think she sounds a lot younger than a girl who is almost 20 years old.
I live in a family of 15 people, and my parents are abusing, they abuse us, and my 2 little sisters right now are chained up.
And when the police turned up to meet Jordan on the corner, I can't imagine what they expected to find there. Perhaps they thought it was a prank, but Jordan had taken photographs of her family's horrible situation on the same phone. And after looking at these truly awful images, the police had to take action. The police went in for a welfare check. What the cops discovered in that family house and what Jordan's parents had done to her and her brothers and sisters was more shocking than anything they could have believed. For years, David and Louise Turpin had worked together to chain up, beat, and even choke their children. They only allowed their children to eat once per day and shower just once per year. Even the police noticed how poor Jordan smelled when she was rescued. The older children appeared much younger because of how little they'd eaten growing up. The oldest victim, who was almost 30, only weighed 82 pounds. One preteen had an arm circumference that was the same as a baby. And the children barely knew anything about the real world. Some didn't even know what medicine and police were, which isn't very surprising. Those really weren't healthy conditions for anyone. And Jordan says in her phone call,
We lived in filth, And sometimes I wake up and I can't breathe because how dirty the house is.
There was trash and human waste everywhere. The authorities even found pets that had passed away and had just been left there, which I can't even. Now, what was done to the children was described as calculated and systemic. These two sickos knew exactly what they were doing, and they got away with inflicting this insanity on the people they were meant to protect for a really long time. What Louise and David Turpin did was so bad that one of the rescued boys, who was in his mid-teens, could barely walk. He had a major vitamin D deficiency and visible scoliosis. Scoliosis is a condition where your spine gets bent out of shape and twists over to one side. It can usually be treated easily, but you need a parent or guardian that cares enough to take you to a doctor to fix it. While he was being treated, the same rescued teenager told the doctor that he wanted to kill animals and could predict the future. So yeah, it would take a lot of physical and mental therapy to overcome what had been done to him. Even when they got rescued, many of them spent over 6 months being treated in hospitals because, they'd never been able to develop normally. Unfortunately, even after they were rescued from that awful house, some of the younger Turpins still didn't end up anywhere safe. In one case, the very people who were meant to protect them were almost as bad as Louise and David Turpin. Ugh. But life with their so-called parents was unbelievably horrible. Louise and David Turpin would put out fresh, delicious smelling pumpkin or apple pie on the counter, knowing full well how hungry their 13 kids were. And as much as I love puppies, it's disturbing that the 2 pet dogs at the house were fed way better than the children. Louise and David would even let the food go moldy in the fridge. The kids were punished if they tried to eat more than the 1 bologna or peanut butter sandwich a day that they were allowed. They got more than just a slap on the wrist for acting up. Way worse. And because they were chained up in their rooms for up to 20 hours a day, that didn't give much of a chance to get anything else. They were totally controlled, even the ones who were basically adults. It's no wonder Jordan made a run for it. She just had no choice. And they're all still struggling to adjust to a life away from that horrible house. Also, they still can't access the funds that were raised for them. Over $600,000. Because the real world can be totally rough and just as mean. Some of them have had to survive by couch surfing. What the heck is going on? I mean, at least they're free now, right? But they should be able to access all the help they can after such an awful start. And what eventually happened to their so-called parents? Did the children at least get justice?
I cannot describe in words what we went through growing up.
My parents took my whole life from me, but now I'm taking my life back.
David Turpin was so torn up about what he'd done, or maybe just upset about being caught and called out for it, that he let his lawyer read a statement instead. In the statement, David Turpin claimed that
I never intended for any harm to come to my children.
Louise Turpin also acted as if she cared in her statements to the jury.
I pray for my children every day. I want to say again how truly sorry I am for everything I've done to hurt them. I love them more than they could ever imagine.
Maybe instead of only praying for them, you could have actually tried feeding them. Twisted monsters like this pair always act like they're sorry, but that's only once they've been caught, right? But did the jury fall for their tears and apologies? The Turpins pleaded guilty to 14 charges of torture, adult abuse, child endangerment, false imprisonment, and they definitely did even more horrible stuff than that. That's just the surface of what they inflicted. In April 2019, the Turpins' parents got sentenced to 25 years to life each in prison. And finally, they won't even get parole for another 22 years. So at least that pair of monsters are finally getting a taste of what they put their family through. Because damaging someone can affect them mentally and physically for the rest of their lives. There are some mysteries where the answer is so shocking, you wish you didn't know the truth. And that's going to be especially true in this case of a teenager who disappeared in Augusta, Georgia. I'm afraid that in this one, the truth behind what happened is truly horrifying.
Really? He messed with all this prettiness and he's gonna run away with our daughter? Come on now, that's stupid.
So hold on tight, okay? Here we go. LaTanya Janelle Carwell, usually well known as Janelle, was a teenager with a bright future ahead of her. She was an honors student at T.W. Josie Comprehensive High School and won lots of achievement awards. Her pastor described her like this.
Janelle was a loving, very intelligent, smart, young woman who wanted to be a doctor, who was an honor student.
Basically, she had an awful lot going for her, which makes what happens to her next seem even more insane. She lived in Richmond County, Augusta, Georgia, with her family. This was her little sister, her mom, Tanya Tripp, and her stepfather, Leon Tripp. Now, the night of April 17th, 2017 was her 16th birthday, and also Easter Sunday. She had a pretty big day. After they had enjoyed a cookout party at their home with friends and neighbors, her mom went to bed early and left Janelle and Leon to finish celebrating. At least, this is what Janelle's mom told the police had happened on that night. Tanya went to bed and was woken by Leon at about midnight. He asked if he could borrow her phone to look up something. A friend of his, Maurice, needed a lift because his car had broken down. Not thinking anything of it, she gave Leon her phone. But because he wasn't great at using the map on the phone, he wanted Janelle to go with him to help him with the directions to Clarksville, South Carolina. Now, that's kind of a weird thing to take a kid to do that at that time of night, right? And Leon took Tanya's phone with him because apparently he didn't have access to the directions. Like, okay, maybe it wasn't a smartphone? Or he didn't know about an app store? Well, it all sounds pretty strange to me. Anyway, things quickly became worse. Tanya didn't hear from Leon or her daughter again for the whole next day. Neither of them had returned from their late night mission, and their phones weren't ever answered again. So Janelle's mom made a panicked call to the police to report that they were missing. This is the 911 call she made.
It's not like they're not to answer the phone. I've been calling and texting and leaving messages and nothing.
Don't you think she sounds totally scared here and that the worst might have happened to them? Tanya was so sure that if they'd seen her phone calls, they would have picked up. So, of course, this huge search started for them both. The cops, and especially the local community, got really involved. Everybody wanted to find the missing teenager. The frantic search carried on for the next 2 weeks. A local pastor who had a radio show got involved with raising awareness about the case, and Janelle's mom appeared on Facebook Live streaming event. She told watchers that she had brain and lung cancer. That makes all of this even sadder, right?
I need my baby home, like 15 days ago type home, because she has never been away from me this long.
Now, on the Facebook post, they were trying to raise money for a reward, and by June, the amount was over $2,500. But the community was also terrified that there was some kind of predator around, threatening their lives. The publicity around Janelle was hard to miss, and I think people were pretty freaked out. But by late April 2017, law enforcement had finally found Leon's car. His white pickup truck was spotted about a mile from their home. The cops searched it for any signs of a struggle or DNA that could prove the worst, but nothing turned up there. I guess that's a good thing, but really frustrating. So the cops checked their cell phone records. What they found suggested Janelle and Leon hadn't been anywhere near the Clarksville area, where the friend had apparently broken down. And even worse, Janelle's social media channels had gone completely silent. For a popular teenager like her to switch off, yeah, this fact made the cops and everyone who cared for her super worried. A charity called Bring Our Missing Home, which helps people to find their missing loved ones, was closely involved with the case at this point. They were really concerned that despite all the coverage about Janelle's disappearance and the millions of flyers that had been spread all over Georgia, there hadn't been a single phone call or message with a sighting of Janelle. But eventually, the police did hear something important about the case. Only, it really wasn't what they were expecting to find. Reports had finally started coming in about a sighting. And guess who it was? It was Leon Tripp. He'd been seen all on his own somewhere in Atlanta, but sadly, there was no sign of Janelle with him. The police realized they had to dig into Leon's past. They didn't have to look very far because it turned out he had a super dark criminal history.
He had some assault charges, he had some cruelty to children charges.
He'd even been in jail for aggravated assault. And Janelle's mom knew all about this. In fact, they'd both gone to high school together. And after Leon was put away for a few years, they'd somehow grown even closer, exchanging letters and phone calls. Very romantic. Leon and Tanya had even married while he was still locked up, but it seems like Janelle's mom really didn't mind any of his super sketchy past. Once he was released, as I mentioned earlier, he moved into the same house with her and her 2 daughters. This was in 2015, 2 years before Janelle vanished with him. I mean, that background is totally not a great look for Tanya or Leon. And this time, the cops were after him for abduction charges. They were pretty sure he'd done something to his stepdaughter. But Janelle's mom really didn't want to believe this. One reporter even noticed how little she wanted to hear it.
When I asked her, hey, investigators believe that he's taken her, she was very defensive.
And the lady who ran Bring Our Missing Home, Kathy Rhodes, agrees that Tanya's actions were getting sketchier. Kathy had worked really close to Tanya the whole time they were trying to find Janelle. She couldn't help noticing that the number of red flags kept increasing. Too much just didn't add up. Following the suspicion that Leon might have abducted her daughter, Tanya had said in one interview,
"Really? He messed with all this prettiness and he's gonna run away with our daughter? Come on now, that's stupid."
It's definitely kind of an odd thing to say, isn't it? By now, the people who were working on the case were in close touch with Tanya, and they were starting to really get anxious about her motives. And the signs of Tanya's possible jealousy of her daughter really didn't stop there. She also said,
and all this craziness about they ran off to be together and stuff, no, it's no truth in none of that. That's her dad, that's his daughter, that's it. I'm his wife, not her. So all that craziness, it's no happening to that.
By this point, Tanya was even accusing law enforcement of only coming after her and not doing enough to find her daughter. But the police had finally tracked him down. A call came through that Leon had been discovered. He was at a U-Haul depot in Atlanta. This should be good news, right? But guess who is right there with him? Well, you're not gonna believe it, or maybe you will. When the cops arrived at the U-Haul to arrest Leon, Tanya Tripp was right there with him. That's pretty hard evidence that something was messed up about the whole situation. What were they both hiding about Janelle? The cops were now absolutely sure that Tanya had known much more about her daughter's disappearance the entire time, but she insisted she'd only seen Leon by complete accident. Tanya claimed that she was being evicted and had begun to move to Atlanta. Then she spotted Leon walking along the road while she was driving the U-Haul back to the depot, and that's why they were together. Totally believable, right? Tanya really tried to sell that story, but yeah, that's all about as sus as it sounds. Nobody was buying it. I mean, seeing him out there by accident has gotta be 1,000,000,000 to 1 shot. It's totally unlikely, and the cops thought so too. They immediately charged Leon with abduction, and Tanya was hit with hindering the apprehension of a criminal. Tanya called a neighbor from jail to let her know. The neighbor said,
"Are you serious?" And she said yes.
It was starting to dawn on everyone just how much they'd been lied to. Given how hard the community worked to find Janelle, this must have hurt so much. And this began to crack the story that Tanya had been telling into lots of totally inconsistent pieces. Once Tanya was arrested, she kept telling the cops slightly different versions of her story. And Leon told a totally different story to that. Leon insisted that he and Janelle were going to Atlanta all along. Investigator Richard Roundtree reported that Leon claimed
gave her some money in which to get on the bus and come back to Augusta, and he hadn't seen her since.
Obviously, this wasn't true and she never made it. But when confronted, Tanya suddenly stopped answering further questions, and the cops couldn't get her to respond to any details of this other story. Perhaps because it wasn't rehearsed with Leon? The cops also closely examined that 911 call Tanya had made. They soon figured out it was all a massive lie and figured she had used it to send the search teams in the completely wrong direction. This would have bought Leon a lot more time to do whatever the heck he was doing. Oh, and Janelle's mom, and I use that term pretty loosely at this point, totally didn't have cancer of any kind either. She lied about all of that too, which is the least sick thing going on here. Remember how much Tanya wanted her daughter back? This video is just 11 days after Janelle went missing.
I'm not eating, I'm not sleeping, I'm just worried about my family.
Even if she did care, she couldn't have been very interested in justice for her daughter. This all sounds totally similar to the case we covered about Bernadette Walker. She had vanished, and the evidence started to mount up that both of her parents had a lot more to do with the teenager vanishing than it first appeared. Bernadette's mother also pretended to not know anything at all. all. We've had no contact with her since 1 a.m. on July 20th when she texted me to say she'd be home soon. None of her friends have heard from her, and she's not accessed social media. That sounds kind of familiar too, doesn't it? And in Bernadette's case, it was just as shocking because you don't expect someone's mom to cover up for anyone who would hurt them. But looking back at Tanya's behavior now, yeah, every single thing she did was just a huge lie. It was all a big act to cover up something terrible that she knew. So both parents were arrested and charged. Leon had also submitted a statement saying that Janelle was no longer living. All the cops could do now was carry on looking for poor Janelle's remains, but they still don't know where she was. And don't forget that Janelle had a little sister. I can't imagine how she was coping with all of this. And as far as I know, she's still with an aunt, where I hope she's in much safer hands. And then, almost 1 year after Janelle had vanished on the Easter weekend, the cops released a very sad statement.
We received a phone call from a citizen and had discovered what they believed to be human remains.
This came from a person in Augusta, not all that far from where Janelle lived. They'd found something suspicious and upsetting in the garden of the house they were about to rent, and naturally, they called the police. The area was searched and the sad truth was confirmed. Investigators confirmed that this was what remained of Janelle. She was identified by some dental records taken just before her birthday. And finally, Leon and Tanya were fully charged for the horrible things they'd done. They've both been charged for involvement and in concealment of whatever happened to Janelle. In fact, the reason why they did something so disgusting still isn't clear. And as you can imagine, the local community is totally cut up about being gritted by Tanya for so long. They can't believe they fell for it.
She's a liar, in my opinion. She's told a whole lot of lies.
And people had worked so hard, they even got sick trying to find her. Community leader Ray Montana had told the reporters about this. Days and days of 100 degrees, sweating. Many of our people fell out. A couple of them went to the hospital. One young lady had to get a spinal tap because of the heat and everything. It was definitely emotional. It caused depression in a lot of our lives because it affected the community. Janelle was like one of our own kids. That's awful. And the details just get worse and worse. In 2018, some awful new evidence was added to the trial. It said that Tanya and Leon had had several meetings with a fixer to arrange a hit on Janelle, and they'd been planning to do it for at least 2 years. That's so cold and revolting, isn't it? What kind of mother even does that?
Perhaps they did solicit someone, but the fact still remains that everything's pointing at them. And I hope that they die by the hands of the state.
This case just keeps on getting worse. Janelle never had a chance to really grow up. The only people who really seem to care about Janelle, apart from her poor sister, are the people who never even knew her. I think it's because what happened to her was so terrible, especially because she had so much to offer that lots of people felt very close to her.
Tanya was creative. She was a critical thinker. This girl was a great writer.
Janelle's school held a vigil at the house where she was finally found. And people that didn't even know her were at the vigil, which they held to give the community some closure. And there are some efforts to make Janelle's passing count for something more. The district attorney arranged for new cadaver dogs for each county. This pupper is called Dora, but they wanted to get Janelle's name in there somewhere. In 2019, 3 Josie High School seniors won $500 each from the Latiana Janelle Carwell Scholarship Award. This comes from the reward money collected while she was missing. Oh, and as for Janelle's so-called parents, Leon is facing the death penalty, and Tanya Tripp is charged with murder in the 2nd degree. But the dates of a full hearing kept getting pushed back, so we'll see what eventually happens to both of them, but I really hope that poor Janelle receives some justice, because she could have really been something amazing, and she was always amazing to begin with. So what do you guys make of this case? How on earth could a mom do that to her own daughter? And why did they even do that to her at all? Let us know what you think down in the comment section below.